Still on benefits of women's participation, you find that, you know what, there's one that really interests me so much. There was a research that was conducted on panchayats. Panchayats is what local government councils are called in India. And a research was conducted on panchayats in India. And in that research, it was discovered that the number of drinking water projects in areas with women-led councils was 62% higher than in those with men-led councils. Is it that men don't understand the use of water? I am not going to say no. But when it comes to comparing how much women need water to how much men need water, based on the roles that have been assigned to women, you will find that women always worry about water because they have to cook, they have to wash, they have to do all kinds of things with water. So I am not surprised that in those local councils in India that had women, you know, chairing those councils, women-led councils, the number of water projects were 62%, a whopping 62% higher than in those councils that were led by men. In Norway, a direct causal relationship between the presence of women in municipal councils and childcare coverage was found. So women in those councils would naturally advocate for childcare coverage because they know what it means. I mean, let's look at it practically. As a man, even if your office has a creche, how would you like your newborn baby to be brought to the creche in your office compared to if your wife also has a creche in her office? I mean, the natural thing to do would be to take the baby to the creche where the mother is close by. The same thing with schools. I remember when my children were schooling, if any of them took ill in school and they needed attention, of course the mother would be the first person the school will summon, you know. So it's part of our upbringing, it's part of what we have been doing naturally. And of course we need more men to enter into that space to support the children that bear their names, for crying out loud. You know, I personally do not think that a man loses respect or a man loses his status if you come to the point where you play with your children, where you feed your own children, where you even bathe your own children. I do not think a man loses respect. Actually, for those of us who are women who have been in that situation where our husbands were supportive at that point in our lives, we came to respect him more and not despise him. I hope we're speaking to someone in class this morning. You know, your authority as a man does not lie in just waking up and running away from home and having nothing to do with your children. We push them away, and at the end of the day, you know, in old age, you are left with regrets. I'm not surprised that many children love their mothers more than their fathers because mommy is always available. Even when she's not at home, she's thinking, what are they going to eat? You know, what are they going to feed on? And all of that. Many men also do that these days. Things are changing. But, you know, there is still a lot of gap, and families are better off when both parents are actually interested in the welfare of the home. There's evidence, we're still on benefits of participation, of women's participation. There's evidence that women's leadership in political decision-making processes improves them. This is not me just speaking. This is taken from empirical research. And you'll find that in your own home too. When you just come and dish out instructions to people without carrying them along, how do the people in your home get to implement those decisions? They may implement it out of fear, not out of buy-in. And which one do you think is better? Is it a decision that we all sat down and decided, okay, this is how we want to run our home? The children make their suggestions, the mother makes a suggestion, the father makes suggestions, and we all come to agree. We're not saying that you must take one person's decision as final, but we all come to agree and come to a reasonable compromise. That decision is likely to be implemented happily. You know, much more than the one that is dished out to everybody to be implemented by force. Still on benefits of women participation, we find that women demonstrate political leadership by working across party lines through the Parliamentary Women's Caucus. When it comes to Parliamentary Women's Caucus, nobody is thinking party, nobody is thinking APC, nobody is thinking PDP or ABGA or, you know, whatever other party. Women are able to identify with themselves and they work across those party lines, in their parliamentary caucuses, championing issues of gender equality, such as the elimination of gender-based violence, parental leave and childcare, pensions, gender equality laws, and electoral reform. Okay, now why are women pushing to be part of governance? Why are women pushing, to be part of the beneficiaries of development, not just in our country, but globally? And the next session looks at women as agents of national development. Are women trying to reap where they have not sown? Not at all. Whatever struggle brought us to the point where we are today, women have been part of it one way or the other. Women have been part of it one way or the other. And also in a home where, let's say, a woman is jobless or does not even have a business, does not go out to make any money for the family. Certain men like to sit down and just wave their hands and say, my wife is just there eating, she's not doing anything. There is actually hardly any woman who does nothing, whether she's working or bringing money or not. Think about the meals that she cooks in the home. Think about the care, the nurturing, that she provides for the children. Think about those domestic things that she does. If you were to pay a worker to nurse your baby, the woman is not bringing in money, but she's saving you that money. She's saving the family that money. If you were to hire a caterer to cook all the food that you eat in your house, yes, the woman may not be bringing in any money, but she's saving you the money you would have paid to someone else to do it. So when we say things like, my wife does nothing, let's think about it twice. For somebody like me, for example, when I have the opportunity, I do dishes, I cook. If you are to pay me even ordinary minimum wage for those, things that I do in my home, how much do you think it will cost the family? And of course, for me, I qualify much more than minimum wage. With a PhD, if I wash plate for you, you should be able to pay beyond minimum wage. That also, that is just in the lighter mood, but it's very real. So let's look at the issue of women empowerment. Is it an imposition? Is it a contamination of our culture? Let us never lose sight of the fact that women contributed immensely to the development of society, even in pre-colonial times. It is unfortunate that women's activities were not fully documented. And so what we have today is history. When you break that word into two, you have his story, the story of men. His story is what we have today. And one writer called Wolf puts it nicely. He said, for most of history, let me call it his story, most of history, Anonymous was a woman. Even in the Bible, Anonymous is a woman. Is that not so? For the people who wrote the Bible, because they were writing with their Jewish culture in mind. Listen to me, when you read the Bible, don't make the mistake of thinking that it was God that subverted women's rights. No, because in the places where God spoke and he wanted to talk about women and men, he was very specific. Okay, if you look at the book of Joel chapter 2, if you look at it from verse 28, where the Bible was talking about, in the latter days I will pour out my spirits upon all flesh. He says my sons and daughters. So men were mentioned, women were mentioned. And if you look at those places in the Bible where God was speaking, he mentioned women, he mentioned men. Even in Numbers 27, one passage I love so much, there were 5 ladies. I believe that they were unmarried ladies, because marriage also confers a form of respect in our country or in our community. If you're not married, they say, this woman is not married. But before God, married or not married, though, if you are his child, when you speak to him, he listens. In Numbers 27, 5 ladies, came to claim their rights from Moses. They lost their father, and the father's land was going to be given to his father's brothers because he didn't have sons. And these ladies went to Moses and the elders and protested and said, why would our father's land go to his brothers when we are here? And Moses said, well, this matter, he passed me, oh, let me go and ask God. And Moses went and consulted with God, and God said, the daughters are right. Why would you give their father's land to somebody else when they are here? And the land was given, to these girls, 5 ladies, right? If they were married, I'm sure their husband would have been the ones to speak because of their cultural beliefs at that time. But these ladies stood up for their rights, and God himself sanctioned. And the Bible says that law was changed permanently forever, because those girls dared to open their mouths to ask for their rights. So her story was never really fully told. His story took the center stage. And for many of us today, seriously speaking, we are products of women's upbringing. My grandmother played a vital role in my upbringing. My mother also played a vital role, even though later in life, my father was in school in the US, and they met me for the first time when I was 7 years old. All that time it was my grandmother, it was my mother, and if I do not write about their stories, those stories, and my grandmother took care of many children, not just me. In fact, it was well known that in the family, if you have problems financially looking after your children, just go and give them to mama, because mama was a great merchant, and a disciplined woman who was taking care of everything. She paid for my primary education, and all of that. So you find that if those stories are not documented, I recently wrote something about my grandmother called Grandma Was a Man, and I put a question mark, because the things that my grandmother did were the things that men did in the village. She built houses, sponsored children both to primary and secondary and higher institution, and all of that. And I put a question mark there. Was she a man? No, she was a woman, but she made all those achievements. If I don't write that story, nobody else will. And that is why for all of us listening to this lecture today, there are stories in your lives of the great women that played a role in your life. You better document it, otherwise those stories, the inequality will be perpetuated, because nobody will reckon with what women have achieved. I'm going to rush through the rest of the slides. On slide 25, which says women as agents of development in pre-colonial times. So in Yoruba land, for example, we have some significant roles that women played. We had the Yellow Days, we had ladies of the palace. There were 8 titled ladies of the highest rank, and 8 female priestesses in addition to the Ayabas are the king's wives. These were influential women. We've all heard of Moremi of Ife, and then in Borno State we have the position of the Megira, that is the queen mother, and the position of the Gumsu, the first wife of the king. These are influencers. They may not hold visible power, but they hold what we call hidden power, because they have the ear of the king. They can speak to him, they can cajole him, they can say, no, my husband, this is how things should go. And the man comes, in his visible position and takes decision, but somebody has worked on him overnight, cajoling him and appealing to him. And that is why some of us, when we do advocacy, we also like to talk to, the president's wife, the wives of the governors, because they have hidden power. They can influence things from their bedrooms. Now, in pre-colonial time, we also had in the northwest a woman called Queen Bakwa Tuku, who was said to have founded Zaria and was succeeded by her daughter Queen Amina of Zaria. Queen Amina was a warrior. We all read about her in history. She built fortified walls around Zaria, and that has been the model of architecture in the north. If you are familiar with the northern part of the country, you will find that those fortified walls are still there in many places. Of course, the popular Emota of Benin was a woman of influence. We have the Omu Okwe of Osomari, who was a merchant queen. And if you look into your own community, you will find great women, who have done great significant things, but probably their stories have never been told. That was in pre-colonial time. Now in the colonial times, we experienced what we call a repression of women's rights. So if you think that gender inequality is a Nigerian thing, you're making a mistake. Because if you travel to Europe, travel to America, you will find that in some places there is, in fact, gender inequality is the order of the day. Women's rights are still repressed. And when they came to colonize Nigeria, they also came with, that characteristic. They were working more with male chiefs, so the position of female chiefs, which existed before they came, were also played back or played down. During the colonial times, there was entrenched patriarchy. Gender relations were altered. Male chiefs collaborated with the colonial administration in tax collection and governance. The position of female chiefs declined in importance. Colonial economy was export oriented, and that undermined the prestige of the traditional occupations of Nigerian women. There are several other things, but I'm going to just go to slide 29. Slide 29, it says it was only in the 1950s that 3 foremost female activists were appointed into the House of Chiefs. And these 3 women were Chief Mrs. Olufunmilayo Ransom Kuti, who was appointed into the Western Nigeria House of Chiefs, Chief Mrs. Margaret Ekpo, and then of course Chief Janet Mokelu, both appointed into the Eastern Nigeria House of Chiefs. So you can see that very few women were active, but those ones that were appointed, they played active roles to the point that their names are stamped in history today. Still in the colonial time, women fought against marginalization. Oh, they didn't wait. So there was the Aba Women's War, which was popular in history in those days of 1929, where women rose up to challenge exploitation. In that war, 10,000 women, 10,000. And even today, if you can whip up 10,000 women that believe in a cause, you know that they are a formidable cause, force to reckon with, a formidable force to reckon with. 10,000 women demonstrated in Owerri, Calabar districts. And then, of course, we know the story of Olufunmilayo Ransom Kuti, who was christened the Lioness of Lisabi. She was a force to reckon with. She was fighting, for justice for market women and several other things. And then we heard about Hajia Gambo Sawaba in the north and how she led a lot of process. So we know his story. What is her story? We need to all collaborate to begin to tell her story. Stories of our mothers, stories of our grandmothers, those great women that have changed our lives. Now, slide 32. In the post-colonial era, that is the contemporary time where we live in today, opportunities for women to trade has expanded. Women in wage employment, has increased. Though, of course, up to today, many women are still employed, as cheap labor. But at least there's a lot of improvement in women who receive salaries. Oil wealth has mostly been in the hands of men. Women are still marginalized in the oil sector. How many women own oil wells? Very few. Women began to make giant strides in the 1980s and have appeared at all levels of offices. Today, if you look at banks, you see women as bank managers, in social services, in nursing, in medicine. So we have many medical doctors now, female medical doctors, running successful hospitals, female pharmacists. We have journalists that are blazing the trail. We have many women taking giant strides in the film making industry, in music, in engineering, in teaching, even in piloting. The other day I took a flight, from Gombe to Abuja. I didn't even see the pilot. When you get into a flight, sometimes you don't even care who is flying it and we don't look. It was when we landed safely and smoothly in Abuja. One man, shouted and said, "Hey, see how this woman landed this plane smoothly." And I turned back, I looked at him. Wow. So a woman flew this plane. For me, because of my personal fear of flights, when a flight lands well, I know. And that flight actually landed so well. And then one man sitting beside me said, "Hey, if I know say a woman fly this flight, I will not enter." Meanwhile, we have already landed though. But he was still lamenting and saying, if I knew it was a woman. So that thing is still there. Do you know that recently I saw a headline from, I don't know whether it's from a Swiss newspaper, 3 newspapers, saying that a grandmother from Nigeria is the one to head the World Trade Organization. And Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala took offense, of course. Why describe her as a grandmother from Nigeria? But seriously speaking, being a grandmother is supposed to be a blessing. But it has now become something they try to use to belittle her, that she's 66, she's a grandmother, and she's, you know, of course, the newspapers had to apologize when she protested. But you see, grandfathers, in fact, great-grandfathers ruling America. Oh, but it's not a headline. It's not a headline. How old is Biden versus Okonjo-Iweala? How old is Trump? Or, yeah, versus Okonjo-Iweala. You know, I'm not going to say more than that, but we know that usually when a woman takes a powerful position, many people are really not comfortable with it, and because of that, they try to belittle you. We have our sister Hajia Amina Mohammed, you know, at the UN, you know, in the World Bank, we have had people like Obi Ezekwesili, you know, and all of that. So women are making giant strides, and of course, women's increased access to higher education is one of the greatest legacies of the post-colonial era. We have many female professors, doctors, PhDs, you know, and all of that today. And women have not been resting on their oars, like we have said, and their quest for self-actualization has led them to form many women-only groups in some communities, even in the church. In the Catholic Church, you know how powerful the CWO is. They sit on your case, you are in trouble. You know, in Igbo land, we have what we call the Umuada-Igbo, a group that has over 12 million women, and they go home, you know, like every year across the world. They go home every year, like, you know, to have what is known today as the annual August meetings. Somebody just needs to mobilize these women's groups to focus on the right issues, and you find that things are going to change. In Roboland, we have what we call the Egweyas. You know, when you offend Egweyas, our old mamas, when you offend Egweyas, ready for them because they're ready to strip for you. And in my place, when you look at an old woman's nakedness, it's a curse. So they use all kinds of methods. It may not be conventional, but when they want to wield power, they know what to do. So we have groups like the Federation of Muslim Women Association of Nigeria, a powerful force working on education and healthcare. We have the Young Women Christian Association in the north. You know, the women's group called Zumuntamata. They are very powerful also, if they care to use that power positively. And of course, as I wind down on this lecture, you know, some people often say that women do not cooperate with women. Maybe at some point, if the class, you know, has time, you may want to discuss that issue. And the way I replied somebody sometime, I found it really interesting. I said, women do not cooperate with women. Really? It is only women that will sit down and you find 2 or 3 of them, or even 4 of them, marrying the same man, one man. And 4 of them will sit down and be planning, what is our husband going to eat today? Who has rice? Who has Maggi? Let's cook for our husband. How many men can cooperate to marry one woman? 4 men. So what will our wife wear today? What will our wife eat today? Even ordinary boyfriend, if you know, if you have a girlfriend you're not married to and you find that she's dating somebody else, how do you relate with the other guy? If you think this is funny, but it's a serious matter. Women do cooperate with women. Let's not, men also oppose men. In politics, men actually even carry gun and kill each other. Is that not so? So let's not make it a woman thing. Human beings do disagree with human beings, and whether they are women or they are men, you know, we need to find a way to resolve conflicts. Now, the final part of this presentation has to do with the ideological approach. All I've been talking about since morning, you know, has to do with the development approach. The development approach is literally saying that gender equality fosters progress, it fosters development, and it's something that our country has signed to. And because you are operating in this country called Nigeria that has signed to the Sustainable Development Goals, you are under obligation to promote equality. And equality does not mean that we are all equal in size or equal in shape, excuse me, or equal in education. Equality means make it possible for me to fulfill my potentials as a woman, and you as a man fulfill your own potentials, and together we can clap. There is nobody that claps with one hand. We have men, we have women. When we join our potentials together, we are greater for it. The final part has to do with the ideological approach. And the ideological approach, just tells us that in our various communities, in our various institutions, in the homes where we come from, there are informal sanctions, taboos, customs, traditions, and codes of conduct, and also some formal rules that regulate our behavior. And those regulations determine what a girl or a woman sees as her entitlement, and what a boy or woman also sees as boy or man also sees as his entitlement. And if you look at, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, actually has broken those customs, into various categories. There are 5 main categories, and they call them, social institutions. One of the categories is called discriminatory family code. Discriminatory family codes. So there are restrictions on women's decision-making power and status in the family. How do we raise our children? How do we raise our girls? How do we raise our boys? What are the codes, that guide the way we raise our children in our homes? Do we raise the girl to be inferior, or do we raise the boy to be inferior? Or do we raise them on an equal basis? That is discriminatory family code for you. And it is from there that children derive their self-identity. If you are not careful, it's in the home that, a girl will believe that, I'm just a girl, I can't go far. Or the boy will believe, I'm just a boy, I can't go far. Of course, most of the time, boys don't have that belief because society favors them, and all of that. The next index for measuring inequality is what we call restricted physical integrity. This has to do with restrictions on women's control over their bodies. So it has to do with attitudes towards violence against women. So a girl says something and, a boy slaps her. That is violence. You're encroaching on her space. This space that you're looking at is my space. When you hit me, you are encroaching on my space. Even if I've said something to you, because sometimes when you beat your wife as a man, you say in mouth too sharp. Okay? If somebody says something to you verbally, you can reply verbally. You don't need to hit anybody. That is not to say that we should, say bad words to each other. So attitudes to violence against women, prevalence of domestic violence, laws addressing domestic violence. So like the VAP Act is a law that now addresses domestic violence. How about sexual harassment? That is so common these days everywhere. You find it in church, you find it in schools, you find it in the workplace, and all of that. We need to watch out for that. We need to guard against it. How about female genital mutilation? That is also not acceptable. It also leads to a lot of inequality. In fact, it results from inequality, and it increases inequality. Then there's what we call son bias. Son bias, is intra-household bias towards sons and the evaluation of daughters. So we find in some families, when they give birth, if it's a boy, they make a big celebration. If it's a girl, everybody is sad. Another girl, especially when they have had more than one girl, another girl has come again. That also tells on how much resources the family is ready to invest, on both the girls and the boys. And it results in, glass ceilings for their development if some resources are withheld from their own growth process. Then we have what we call restricted resources and assets. This has to do with restrictions on women's access to, control of, and entitlement to resources. For example, access to land. How many women have secure access to land? Even if you have access to use a piece of land, who owns the land? And when the landowner wants it back, you can be thrown out, even with the crops that you have planted and all of that. Now, how many land titles are held by women in Nigeria? There are some women who even buy land. They don't buy in their names because they are afraid of what the society will say. So they buy either in their husband's names or in their children's names. I heard a legislator sometime in Abuja say something that really hurts me. That what do women want? After all my lands and all my landed property, I have listed my mother as my next of kin. Wow. So I say your mother as your next of kin. What about your wife? And he was babbling, and I found that really interesting. For the men in the class this morning, I don't know who your next of kin is. This is how we create the grounds, for our women to suffer, because God forbid anything happens, because she's not your next of kin, she has no entitlement whatsoever, and your mother being your next of kin. I don't know how many sons are praying for their mothers to die and inherit their property. I mean, for them to die, for themselves, pray for themselves to die so that their mother can inherit their property. I find that really ridiculous, when I heard it. And I made sure, of course, that I pointed it out, in that meeting. So, access to financial services is also under restricted resources and assets. How many women have secure access to financial services? If you want to borrow money from a bank to do business, you need collateral. How many women have landed property, that will serve as collateral? Things are beginning to change, though, and I encourage the women in the class, this morning, so begin to think this out. We have moved beyond the stage where a woman is 100% dependent on a man. No way. You have two hands, you have two legs. Go out there, look for something to do. There may not be jobs everywhere, but there's work everywhere. We often say that. People get offended when we say it. Even if it's to sweep the road and make some personal money for yourself, so that it's not every time your children want pencil, they want Maggie, you're looking for their father, and then they become overwhelmed, become irritable, and all of that. And when a woman brings a little and a man brings a little, the family is more comfortable at the end of the day. And then finally, on the social institutions and gender index, we have restricted civil liberties. And this has to do with restrictions on women's access to participation and voice in the public and social sphere. So access to public space, issues of political quotas. So if we have a quota, for example, that in every political party should nominate at least 30% women or at least 30% men, we'll find that this is what many countries have done, to achieve equality in their own political sphere. Issues of political representation and then workplace rights. All of these have to do, with the ideological approach, beliefs that we have that is preventing women from participating fully. I worked for an organization called SETPA many years ago, and I love one of their slogans, and I keep saying it at every gender training that I facilitate. They say, when women move forward, the world moves with them. Think about it. How will a woman have what it takes and the children will stay hungry in the house? How will a woman, even the husband will eat before she eats, even if she's the one bringing the resources? So what am I trying